welcome. You are live here on the first official podcast of Fate.org. That's right, Fate, the People's Honorable Alliance for Exposing the Truth. And that's what you're going to find here with us, ladies and gentlemen, and we need your help to gather more information and more wisdom and more truth. You're listening to the sounds right now of the Earth Harp, so beautifully played by William Close. That's right, the People's Honorable Alliance for Exposing the Truth, Fate.org. Check out our website. And thank you for tuning in and joining us here. I am the WordsMyth, and I will be the master of ceremonies for today's podcast. On this first inaugural podcast, we're going to dive deep into the topic of the 28 pages regarding 9/11, the 28 pages that were omitted from the NIST report, which some very good people out there had fought really hard to make sure that it came into the public purview. And the gentleman we have on today, Les Jamieson. That's right, Les Jamieson. He's been a part of that fight, and he is embedded in this story. You'll hear a little bit about him and what he's been up to and the information that he's gathered. So let's get that going. I'm sure you'll enjoy the ride. Good morning and welcome to the first official podcast of Fate.org. That is the People's Honorable Alliance for Exposing the Truth. And I am the Wordsmith. And we are here today with Les Jamieson. Les Jamieson has studied the alternative research into 9/11 since November of 2001. He's been publicly active as an event organizer, street activist, and movement builder since January of 2004. Beginning in 2014, Les spearheaded an effort to generate grassroots support for legislation to release the 28 pages from the Congressional Joint Inquiry on 9/11, as well as mobilize public support for the passage of the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act, JASTA. Les, who organized the panel, has chaired educational panels on 9/11, the 28 pages, and Left Forum in 2015 and 2016. So we're going to go ahead and begin with some opening statements by Les, and then we'll get right into the questions. Les, good morning.
Good morning, Ed. Thank you for having me on this maiden voyage for your podcast series. I wish you great luck. I know it'll be very meaningful materials. I'm glad to share this information regarding a very, very vital and relevant aspect of the 9/11 attacks, having to do with legislation that actually came about due to some declassified information regarding the 9/11 attacks after many years of effort. It was very, very dramatic in many respects, and just reflects very, very strongly on the true nature of the attacks and the true nature of the forces that covered up the reality and the truth of the attacks. So it's also very important to note how effort from the grassroots, from the general public, and the 9/11 families brought all of this about in terms of the final declassification of a whole chapter of report from the Joint Inquiry on 9/11. So the the lesson there is that we, the people, we, the general public, can affect change at the highest levels of government, even with a topic so controversial as 9/11.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and we'll definitely get into some of the ways that people can begin to do that as well. And thank you for what you said earlier. And it's an honor and a pleasure to have you today, and to be putting this inaugural podcast together. And I guess it's very fitting, the topic that we're discussing today, because it's been one that I've personally been focused on and put a lot of energy towards over the years since it happened, in 2001. So this is really great. Thank you very much, Les. Much appreciated.
Absolutely.
Okay, so now, Les, you've been really focused on the declassification of those 28 pages from the Congressional Joint Inquiry on 9/11 for the past 3 years or so. Can you give the background on that official inquiry and what the 28 pages specifically refer to?
Okay, very good. Prior to the 9/11 Commission report, which the public is most familiar with, there was an internal congressional investigation made up of members from the Senate Intelligence Committee and the House Intelligence Committee. So this actually began in 2002. I believe it was January of 2002. And a report was compiled, over 800 pages, that was submitted to President Bush at the time. And the last chapter was on evidence of funding of two of the accused hijackers. And that was a 29-page chapter that was classified within a few months after the White House received it, the entire report, that is. And in 2003, they issued this statement actually classifying that chapter. And this is what the 28 pages refers to, okay? This is, again, the internal and initial investigation into the 9/11 attacks that was conducted by the House and Senate Intelligence Committees.
Okay, and so you said that the chapter itself was 900 and something pages?
No, the entire report was.
Okay.
Yes, over 800 pages, and the chapter was the last chapter. It was about 28 or 29 pages.
Okay, which focus on the funding. Okay. And so, how did you become specifically interested in the 28 pages as a central issue for your activism?
I remember when it was first an issue, when the classification took place, and thought this was very strange back in 2003. And then it kind of disappeared from the radar screen for quite a while. There was so much else going on in terms of 9/11 research and 9/11 activism. Now, fast forward to the summer of 2013, I met a 9/11 survivor by the name of Rick DeSantis. He survived the South Tower attack, and he spoke at our annual symposium, our anniversary symposium in 2013. And he informed me of legislation that had just been submitted earlier that year, calling for the release of the 28 pages. At that time, it was H.R. 428. And at that point, I said to myself, geez, I do remember this, and let me look into this and see what the details are and what the prospects really look like. And that began my interest in the 28 pages and the whole declassification effort. And from there, Ed, I went on to study everything that had gone on and look into the years and years of developments, actually right back to the beginning of the classification of the 28 pages. And for instance, I learned that from day one, several members of the joint inquiry were outraged that President George W. Bush had classified this chapter in the first place. They felt it was an affront to the principle of transparency in government. These members of the Senate, for instance, include former Senator Bob Graham. He was from Florida, Democrat. Also, Senator Richard Shelby, Republican from Alabama, and former Senator Byron Dorgan. And Byron Dorgan went so far as to submit amendments to two other bills, two other pieces of legislation. One of them, I believe, was a defense authorization bill, and he submitted an amendment calling for the release of the 28 pages. So there was an awful lot of outrage there. And then in August of 2003, to take this a little further here, 46 members of the Senate, which is a body of 100 members, 46 of them signed a letter to George W. Bush protesting the classification of the 28 pages and urging him to release them. By the way, when asked why the 28 pages had been classified in the first place, Bob Graham and Richard Shelby issued statements saying, well, it wasn't really for any issues of protecting national security. It was more to protect relationships and embarrassing situations.
Exactly right. Yeah, that's well, and it's exactly those relationships that need to really be looked at under a microscope. And just how deep those relationships go, and why in this particular instance, what really was going on, and I'm curious if any of the people that you mentioned, if they thought any more than that into it, or if they, stopped at relationship protection, or if any of them thought anything more sinister, like many of us have come to know.
Well, I can say that in reference to former Senator Bob Graham, he absolutely felt that there was a cover-up happening in regards to the role of certain Saudi Arabian officials and agencies and some charities that were like front groups that were fundraising to promote and foster and facilitate extreme radical Muslim groups, basically terrorist groups. And he definitely felt that, and has felt and has stated for the whole period up till now, that the FBI was covering up and protecting everything that I just mentioned, certain Saudi individuals, entities, and charities.
Right.
Yeah.
Boom, there they are, the FBI. So now we start to get some more, some more of the folks at home that were taking part in this shroud of mystery.
Absolutely, absolutely. This points to what I would call a criminal faction within the FBI, and I've studied this for years, and sure enough, I've seen instances where high-level officials were receiving warnings. This is within the FBI I'm talking about. Were receiving warnings from field agents such as Colin Rowley, Kevin Wright, another one, Harry Samet. And these were very specific warnings of detecting suspicious activity in state schools in particular. And these warnings were all either ignored or blocked. And interestingly, two of the officials, the FBI senior officials, were actually rewarded. Richard Frasca was given a $30,000 raise, and
wow.
Yes, and Michael Maltby was given a commendation and promotion. Okay, and during this time, there were so many warnings happening. This is in the months leading up to 9/11 attacks, and we have John Ashcroft, who was the Attorney General at the time, receiving warnings. George Tenet, head of the CIA at the time, issuing warnings. Richard Clarke, who was the, quote, terrorism czar, left over, that was carried over from the previous administration, the Clinton administration, all, sounding red alerts here, red flags, and saying, we were going around with our hair on fire. Well, John Ashcroft, interestingly, in July of the summer, 2001, July, he canceled any commercial flights that he was taking. He, due to warnings that he was receiving. However, he then said that that's it. I don't want to hear any more about terrorism. So he was involved in obstruction, and
so let's just clarify that, because I feel like that's a really big point there, and that also kind of speaks to the gentleman that you mentioned who received raises and commendations for ignoring what was happening. So he said, so he basically rearranged his flight intentions due to these warnings, but publicly said, I don't want to hear anything more about terrorism. So he took the precautions necessary, while also saying, there's no need to talk about this.
Yeah, exactly. And Richard Clarke speaks about this. He was just shocked and appalled that he was in a position where he was the expert on counterterrorism, and he was being silenced and even demoted.
Wow.
During these months. Yeah.
Wow.
Very, very, very amazing.
So really, anybody who was trying to make noise with good intel, everybody was told to be quiet, or that what you have to say is not important, and we don't want to hear it. And those who ignored, to me, that would show not only a complicitness, but a foreknowledge, and a sense of being okay with what was going to transpire.
That would be the implication. Absolutely, I've always felt so. And what this amounts to is what we would call legally obstruction, malfeasance, criminal negligence,
tyranny,
and conspiracy. On a legal from a legal standpoint. I want to add another factor here. Zacharias Moussaoui was being investigated, or was being tracked by FBI field agent Colleen Rowley. She sent many memos, and including a 13-page memo up to superiors in the headquarters, FBI headquarters, and she was ignored. And she finally, sent an FBI a memo, 13 pages, to then acting head of the FBI, Robert Mueller. He's back in the news now, of course, being selected as the special prosecutor to investigate Trump and so-called actions that Russia hacked the last election. That's who Robert Mueller needs to be remembered as. He also ignored many warnings from FBI field agents, and that was one very notable one coming from Colleen Rowley. She later was selected as one of 3 whistleblowers of the year, I believe, or one of 3 leading women of the year in, I believe, 2003. So what this was about is saying that Zacharias Moussaoui was a questionable figure participating in very suspicious activities in flight schools. He needs to be arrested and investigated. However, although he was arrested, John Ashcroft would not allow his laptop to be searched, stating that, that would be a violation of his Bill of Rights and his privacy rights. Imagine that.
And what was his history? Did he have a history?
Moussaoui?
Yeah.
Yeah, he had a history of suspicious activities linked to terrorism.
Yeah, so that makes no sense at all for the Attorney General at a time when he's being having his shirt tugged left and right about all kinds of things going on and about to happen, and in the midst of all that, he has a suspect or a someone who's engaged in suspicious activity, and decides that this is a time he wants to be a legal angel and say, no, we don't need to look at his laptop.
Right. He actually used the explanation that no, that would be a violation of his privacy. Now, we know that our intelligence services have no regard for people's privacy when it comes to any forces working to demonstrate or protest against government policies. Zero.
None. Yeah,
our intelligence agencies have been spying on citizens for decades and decades. So this is just highly out of the ordinary.
Absolutely. They don't ask and they don't think, they just do. So for him to all of a sudden be kind of standoffish about doing something they do day in and day out doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Right, completely out of place. John Ashcroft is definitely a person of interest when it comes to the actual conspiracy behind the 9/11 attacks within the U.S. Political framework.
Wouldn't that be great to get him in the hot seat?
I believe he's passed away. It's too late for him, but people around him for sure.
Right. Yeah, it would have been great.
Yeah, and it just should be pointed out for the public to understand how individuals like him and many others that were there, that were complicit, have never been held to account. And there's plenty of publicly documented information that would implicate these people, like John Ashcroft and George Tenet and George W. Bush himself, Donald Rumsfeld, Dick Cheney, Condoleezza Rice. Plenty of documented information that would implicate them, and yet they walk around freely to this day. So this is a big issue that we as citizens need to really come to terms with and figure out.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how, if one local cop or police officer claims that you were parked in a spot and didn't pay the meter, or you were parked in the wrong way, you have no choice but to go to court and answer for that. And if you don't, warrants are issued, and if you still continue to walk around without responding, they will pick you up. And this is for a ticket, and this is for one officer claiming something that you did. Now we're talking about a situation where there's left and right evidence and implications, and this is relating to one of the most severe attack on American soil ever, and these people are absolutely left to go about their day and continue business as usual. That is really something else, and it really says a lot that so many people have not really thought about this, and not presented themselves with this information, and really tried to digest and break it all down. And I think that's what are your thoughts? Do you think that's people kind of in denial, or they're still just so jaded by the system that they don't even second guess, or is it a combination of the two?
Well, it is a combination of the two. That it's the power of the deep state, which is a term being used an awful lot in the last few years. It's the power of, in other words, of the high-level officials within the security state or the military intelligence apparatus, and that the fact that there can be so much evidence of obstruction, collusion, complicity, even lying to Congress and things of this nature, which are all either felonies or worse, and that they never are held to account, and the media never got aggressive in pointing all these issues out at the time, and in pursuing it to the point where they really should have pointed out that there was foreknowledge. Everything that we've discussed so far indicates foreknowledge and obstruction and collusion and conspiracy. Yet the media never pursued these. So this all indicates the power of the secret faction which controls the reins of power within government, within military and finance and policy making.
And then this goes beyond just the United States. We're talking about on a global level.
Yes, absolutely. I would agree that there's a carryover to an international power elite, but what we're looking at here too is a so far what we're looking at is an elite, a faction, a cabal within the highest levels of the U.S. power structure that basically kind of play in tandem with the agenda of a group called Project for a New American Century. This is a group of people that were termed neocons or neoconservatives. They include people like Dick Cheney, Jeb Bush, Donald Rumsfeld, John Bolton, Scooter Libby, Kalme Almazad, and Douglas Feith. Guess what? These are all individuals. Paul Wolfowitz, remember him?
Yep.
And these are all people, Ed, who were part of an agenda, signed on to this agenda calling for complete U.S. military domination of the entire planet and space. And they wanted, in order to accomplish this complete domination and supremacy, in order to garner the support of the American public, it would require a, quote, catastrophic catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. This is all written in a document called Rebuilding America's Defenses. It's a 57-page document that came out 1 year before 9/11. So they got their new Pearl Harbor absolutely with 9/11, because then right away we went on into a war footing, and that's a conversation all in itself. The nature of U.S. policy making, where there's a violating of human rights and torture and invasion of countries without the formal declaration of war by Congress. All of these things, the destruction and undermining of the Bill of Rights and civil liberties. All of these are included with the footing where the U.S. has been attacked, and then the president can say, we are at war. Congress has very little say in the matter at that point. And then everything about our foreign policy and domestic policy when it comes to suppressing and stifling dissent is all under the framework of the fact that the U.S. is at war and can then take extraordinary measures.
That's right, during wartime.
And not be challenged.
That's
during
right.
wartime.
Yep, during wartime, it's the floodgates open, and there are no rules.
There are no rules. And now what fits right into this is the revelation by General Wesley Clark that he visited the Pentagon just days after 9/11, ran into a general that he knew from the Balkans military operation, a decade earlier, and he asked his friend, well, what's going on here? I guess we're going to be invading Afghanistan, aren't we? And the general wound up saying, no, I'm just going to shorten it here, but the outcome was he was told by the general, no, it's far worse. There are plans to invade 7 countries in the Middle East within 5 years.
And to topple all those governments.
To topple all those governments. And these are countries, by the way, that all have oil.
That's right. And they did happen, I believe, in successive order, just as he was told.
The only one that was not invaded, at least formally, was Iran. At some point, the military leadership realized the folly of that notion because of the military power of Iran, and so that was never never embarked upon. However, of course, there are many other hostile actions taken towards Iran. Sanctions and just basically a contentious and adversarial standing towards Iran all these years. But the rest of the 6 other countries have been, in fact, invaded, and with military action happening, and some of them, to this day, all these years. So what my whole point here is that 9/11 set the stage for the neocons' military agenda to basically invade the Middle East, keep it destabilized, and I think it's a good speculation to say this was largely for the purpose of not only dominating their oil production, but partitioning these countries within the Middle East, and divide and conquer. So that's what has gone on in Iraq and Syria, without a doubt.
Seems to be happening here at home too. Divide and conquer. It's the oldest trick in the book, and it unfortunately it's working. But I think that things are starting to turn around, and people are waking up as knowledge continues to spread. And I'll just touch upon one more point, in relation to what we were just saying, and then I'll kind of circle back to the original direction. So what this really points to, when you really take a step back and you look at the bigger picture here, and you say, okay, well, you have this big event, this happening, right, of 9/11, the catastrophic catalyzing event, and that quote comes from before 9/11. So 9/11 happens, and then they roll out this plan, this multi-yeared, multi-country, multi-government toppling plan, which General Clark saw with his own eyes. What this really says and what it shows is that really, the not only the direction of things, but the actual implementation of what's going to happen and what the results will be is all planned out years in advance. And this is something I think people should really take notice of and start to question, how really how deep does this all go, and who are the architects, and what are the present and long-term goals, and how we can kind of awaken to protect ourselves from what the larger plans are, because all of these things are just kind of checkpoints on the way to much larger plans.
Yeah, I would agree, and what you bring to mind is that from so many people, when they begin to inquire into the alternative research on 9/11, it leads to a window in which we start to also study history to a much greater degree and learn so much of history that we never got in any high school or college history class, which has to do with the history of U.S. military engagements, and the history of what's called false flag operations. These, and where events are manufactured in order to make it appear that we're being attacked by outside forces in order to legitimize a military conquest. And once people start to look into that history, it is just shocking to learn of the lies that have been told and the the mechanization of incredible operations, launching wars for conquest and for domination, all due to an agenda to dominate the world's resources and also to consolidate political power and military power. This is what we're up against. And so learning this history, though, Ed, is absolutely vital in order to understand truly where we are today, how we got here, and then finally come to some ideas about what we must do in order to end this insanity, end the destruction, end the killing of millions of people, and end the waste of trillions of dollars for this domination agenda. So this is where truly understanding the events of 9/11 can lead to what I would call a comprehensive approach to resolving finding solutions to the state of the world which need changing.
Yes, very well said, Les. And any of the people who are outside of the scope of being, let's say, in a war-torn nation and stuff, things like that. Those of us who are outside of that are still affected, and it's a subjugation of the common people, through finance and other apparatus. And so, yeah, this is exactly what the whole subject of 9/11 really should do, because once a person comes to terms with the deception and what was actually done, it really begs the question of, well, then what else? What else was a lie? And that's when you really get to open up the can and see all the worms for what they are. And a lot of people would be, really mind blown to find out that things like the Vietnam War were started on false pretenses, and even Pearl Harbor situation was, not accurately, the story was not accurately told on the who's and how's and why's that these things all occurred.
Yeah, and Gulf War 1 and 2, which are, from this generation or the previous one or two generations, they were all launched on false pretenses.
Unbelievable. I wonder if there has been a war, especially one that we've been involved in, or the United States military, that was not started on false pretenses. I wonder if there's even one. I tend to doubt it.
True. They're really every war that you look at, you can find, basically all of the traces of ulterior motives, ulterior agendas, and where the forces behind finance, behind the military-industrial complex, they're all at play, and this is a very important. It helps us to understand the simple fact that I think definitely by the let me go back even to like the Mexican-American War in 1848 and the Spanish-American War in 1898. Shows that there were political forces even back then, all kind of controlled by industrialists and the robber barons, and bankers, of course, that basically were manipulating our government and manipulating the media, the public, even back then. Now, fast forward to World War I, same thing, the Lusitania. We were warned by Germany at the time that there were seaways where ships traveled. We were warned that there were German submarines there watching for ships with armaments, and that this was basically a war zone. And yet, the U.S. sent this passenger ship, the Lusitania, right through that route, that sea route.
And it came through unscathed?
What's that?
It came through unscathed?
No, it was attacked and sunk with civilians on board, and that was what really amped up the U.S. involvement in World War I. So these are all it's all the pattern, and then by World War II, what I think it's very important to add here is there were signs that at that point the U.S. intelligence apparatus with the OSS, Office of Special Operations, which then became the CIA in 1947. By World War II, this intelligence apparatus became more powerful, more devious than the power of the presidents. Okay, in other words, it would surpass the power of the presidency by World War II, because when FDR wanted to dictate the terms of surrender for Germany, Allen Dulles, who was the head of the intelligence at that time, manipulated things behind FDR's back, where he told the Nazi war criminals that he was in favor of protecting, that instead of a unconditional surrender, which FDR was demanding, instead Allen Dulles manipulated things so that many of the worst, most treacherous Nazi war criminals were protected by Allen Dulles and his intelligence operations. So you go from there to the next president, Eisenhower.
And just to quickly make a connection, that's the same Dulles whose airport was used in the 9/11 attacks.
They're right, the same airport named after him, of course, and same one.
Okay.
And it's very important to really understand some of that history as well of the Dulles brothers and their who they really represented and how they wielded power behind the presidency. Truman, Eisenhower, and then especially JFK. With the Bay of Pigs fiasco and that whole history where JFK realized that there was a mutiny coming from the Allen Dulles and the Joint Chiefs of Staff that were going after Castro at the time. And by the way, in the decade from the 1950s to the early 60s, this CIA was involved in so many operations. I'll just list a few. And the point being here is to show how incredibly powerful they were even back then. And this is what we're referring to as the deep state.
Right.
1953, the overthrow of President Arbenz in Guatemala. 1954, the president of Mossadegh, the overthrow of President Mossadegh in Iran. And then shortly thereafter, the assassination of Patrice Lumumba in the Congo. There was also operations in Algeria, and then France to take down President de Gaulle. These are just a few. There were others as well, but you get the idea here. And then, of course, in the 60s, we had the efforts to take out Castro, then Argentina and Chile, and other countries throughout Central America. This was all operations by the CIA because of this agenda to dominate the planet for the interests of very powerful industrialists, robber barons, oligarchs. They were represented by the law firm Sullivan and Cromwell and the investment firm Brown Brothers Harriman, which was the Goldman Sachs of the day. So Why do I bring all this up? This is all part of the power that we continue to be up against. These forces are also behind the JFK assassination, and what's important with that is that we continue to be affected by the fact that JFK, a president was assassinated, then a monstrous, highly orchestrated cover-up took place, and the public was unable, all these years, despite mountains of evidence and highly credible research, all these years, the public has never been able to get justice for the operation that assassinated a president, which was essentially, an inside job.
Okay.
So we need to be aware of that history, and then as concerned citizens, as activists, look to what needs to be done so that the this covert power, this covert and monumental force that operates beneath the surface, that's bigger than the presidency, bigger than even the Congress, bigger even than the judiciary. They've basically, to this point, privatized the military in many respects through these, these contractor companies and other private military companies. So what needs to be done, given that we have all this knowledge, in order to transition from just a community of researchers and activists to become a political force that can finally bring this covert and treasonous power that works under the surface, behind the scenes, bring them to justice.
Yes, that's exactly what needs to be done. They all need to be brought to justice, and that's really the direction I think that things need to go in. Is people need to start being brought up on charges, and we need to have brave brave lawyers out there who are ready to set these types of cases and charges and trials in motion. Just taking from the bodies of evidence that are out there. And speaking of bodies of evidence, the apparatuses that we're speaking of have a trail of literal physical bodies, 1,000 miles long. We just touched upon a few with JFK, and then there's MLK and Malcolm X, and the list goes on.
Robert Kennedy.
Robert Kennedy, that's right. And so this is really what needs to happen, because if things continue where they just have immunity, like carte blanche immunity, whatever you do is okay, then nothing's ever going to change. But once you start taking people down and they're facing the same types of 100, 200, 300 year sentencing that the wrong people are currently facing, like people who have alternative medicines and natural medicines that are curing people of all kinds of diseases, and they're being locked up and killed for those things. We need to see the real criminals and those who are causing detriment to all of humanity need to start being locked up and facing these kinds of real charges in real time. And that might scare some of their brothers into giving up the charade.
Yep, I totally agree. Well said.
Thank you. Okay, so I think that we could probably go all day, and we may have to possibly make this kind of a ongoing thing, because there's a lot
two-parter.
Yeah, well, I think that we're going to keep going here, but I think that there's other directions and other whole conversations that we can have, which would be great. But let's for what we're doing here, let's come back to the 28 pages now. Tell me a little bit about the process, that led up to the pages actually being released, and your role in that process, and how that went.
Okay, very good. After the 20 pages were classified, 2003, August, Bob Clark and a few others, Bob Graham and a few others continued to speak out during those years, and it really troubled Senator Graham, to the point where he wrote a few books in order to try to get this information out, which again he really was pointing to evidence of Saudi involvement in 9/11, and in particular the financing of aspects of the operation, and aiding and abetting, which he believed was going on not only particularly in San Diego, where Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, two of the alleged hijackers that were on the Pentagon flight, were operating out of, where they came into San Diego, and there were a few Saudi individuals, Omar Baznan and let's see, is it Omar al-Bayoumi and Hussein Baznan, I believe his name is, were there to receive these two individuals that were on the Pentagon flight, allegedly. And Graham saw these details and then expanded that to think that, wait a minute, there had to be support in many different locations throughout the country, given the fact that these 19 young Arabs that were blamed for the attacks of 9/11 were poorly educated, spoke very poor English, had virtually no experience in Western culture, yet they were here and they were able to get driver's licenses and apartments and everything it takes to function and live, credit cards, etc., and also to get into flight schools. This all took facilitation and by groups. So what he was pointing to was a larger network of individuals and entities that were in collusion behind the operation, aiding and abetting these 19 Arabs. So he wrote this book called Intelligence Matters, published in 2008. However, he wanted to get into more detail about what he knew and suspected. So he wrote a novel called Keys to the Kingdom, which was published in 2011. And there was a whole chapter there where he goes into details that pretty much mirror what was going on with Saudi support and complicity of the 9/11 attacks. But he was able to do this without getting charged for espionage because it was in the form of a novel. Now, there was a Republican congressman from North Carolina named Walter Jones who read this book, Keys to the Kingdom. Walter Jones is known for his coining of a very interesting phrase back in the 2003 in the build-up to the Iraq invasion. Remember when President Bush, W. Bush, was trying to create a coalition and pressuring countries from around the world to join this coalition to invade Iraq?
Right.
And France, in particular, was in opposition, saying, no, we don't see the real evidence here of Iraq being involved in 9/11 or having weapons of mass destruction and all the other lies that were told. They didn't fall for it. So France declined to be a member of the coalition. Well, then, as a result, France wound up being ridiculed by the U.S. media, and then Walter Jones came up with this term, freedom fries, right? Instead of French fries. Yeah.
So let's drop the
We're going to call them. Right. So that's who he was. Now, however, when he started to, I guess have questions about the 9/11 attacks, and he learned of Bob Graham's book, and Bob Graham, of course, highly respected. He read this book, and he then contacted Bob Graham, and they had a conversation, and he became very curious about this classified chapter of the 28 pages. He had to make several requests to gain access to the the vault where the classified documents are, which any member of Congress can read a classified document by going through certain channels. That's what he did, and he read the 28 pages, and guess what? He did a 180.
Wow.
He did a 180. Once he read what was in there, he realized there was, everything that he thought he knew about 9/11 was wrong.
Out the window.
And, yep. And out of that, he made a decision. He was going to write a House resolution to get those 28 pages released. And he reached out across the aisle because he wanted this to be bipartisan, which it was, which is very unusual, by the way, for Congress to do anything in a bipartisan fashion. He reached out to Democrat Stephen Lynch of Massachusetts, and Lynch did the same thing. He got access, read the 28 pages, and he was shaken and blown away. When he was leaving the vaulted area, he told the guards, he said, you tell your bosses I'm taking action on this.
Wow.
Okay? Yeah. And then another congressman, Thomas Massey of Kentucky, read the 28 pages. He was shaken, and he said something to the effect that it changed everything he thought he knew about 9/11, and he was shocked. And basically, every member of Congress who read the 28 pages left there shocked and shattered and moved by what they read. So, then we could tell by their statements there was had to be something in there very, very troubling and very relevant and very powerful.
Right.
And sure enough, so this led to a resolution that was entered December 2nd of 2013, It was at that time HR 428. And then, again, in August of that year, same year, I was informed about this legislation by Rick DeSantis, a survivor of the South Tower attack. And then in January of 2015 was when the new Congress, the new Congress was commenced. And every time there's a new Congress, then legislation has to be resubmitted. And they're given numbers sequentially. On January 6th of 2015, the same co-sponsors are Walter Jones, Stephen Lynch, and Walter Massey. They were so, to me, this shows their determination, because they acted right away on January 26th and submitted the same resolution, which was given number HR 14. So very early in that Congress, they went after it. So this showed that they were intent upon the release of the 28 pages. And this went on then, this initiated a period of media coverage that was just unprecedented, with all the major news networks and even op-eds from USA Today and New York Post saying, that basically we're looking at evidence here of Saudi financing of the 9/11 attacks, and if that does exist, as is being claimed and alleged, this needs to be made public. So I found that to be just incredibly earth-shattering, that the major media was taking a 9/11 issue and reporting on it to the point where it was almost saturation coverage. And also there was a few articles by the Jersey Widows that I think added to the momentum. They were published in the Huffington Post. And there were many interviews of Senator Bob Graham and others. This is from the beginning of 2015 going into 2016. And then finally in April of 2016, 60 Minutes, the flagship weekly news show on CBS, had a major expose of the 28 pages where Bob Graham was interviewed and 3 or 4 of the 9/11 commissioners were interviewed. This includes Bob Kerry, Tim Romer, and John Lehman. And they went into great depth about how the 28 pages had details about Saudi funding of the 9/11 attacks, and how this information wound up excluded from the 9/11 Commissioner's report. Now, that was aired on April 15th of 2016. 15 days later, Rasmussen Reports, which is a major polling firm, issued a report, a poll, again, just 15 days later, showing that 75% of the American public feels that very important information about 9/11 has been withheld for political reasons, and they wanted everything to be released. No secrecy about the 9/11 attacks. Now,
can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
So, the one thing that I find interesting, because I also felt that at the time, and I guess I have so many different things that I'm involved with or into. I may have not paid as much attention at the time, but I'm not surprised that I was also happy to see there was a lot of coverage going on around these 28 pages, a lot. The only thing which no matter what, it's still good because it brought attention to the subject matter. But it seems like in the interviews that you mentioned and everything like that, the sole focus was on the Saudi, the Saudi aspect. Were there any mention in any of those interviews of some of the other things that we spoke about, like FBI implications and, the Ashcrofts and all these other people, that played whatever roles it is that they played in obstruction or being complicit? No, I feel like probably little to none of that was mentioned. It was primarily just a focus on the Saudi connection. Is that right, or is that an accurate statement?
Well, interestingly, Bob Graham continued to try to expose FBI collusion and cover-up. He actually came out, got pretty aggressive during this period of time, saying that it's what the FBI has been doing all these years is more than cover-up. It's aggressive deception. Okay, those are his words.
Right.
He came out and used also the word cover-up. And by the way, the term aggressive deception is, I think, a very diplomatic way of saying the FBI is lying.
Right.
Okay. But he's a politician and he knows how to frame things.
Right.
So yes, he did continue to go after the FBI in a big way.
But the majority of the media coverage, they weren't really focusing on anything much about the Saudi connection.
Right. Right. No, they.
Right. Okay.
They just went after just the fact that these 28 pages were kind of wrongfully classified. And 14 years by this time had gone by, and there's cause for saying that whatever needs to be exposed should be exposed. And by the way, this is interesting to me. When I first learned of the legislation in August of 2013, I read the legislation and I read some of the statements by Stephen Lynch, Walter Jones, Thomas Massey, and I was particularly intrigued by their 3 points that they used as rationale for calling for the release of the 20 pages. Number one, it's a very important example in where transparency in government should be called into question, and that as a matter of transparency, which should be upheld as a cherished principle of our democracy, and for that purpose, the 28 pages should be released. It's a matter of just plain transparency, which our government must be held to a high standard.
Yeah, second, and the moment that you see that there is no transparency, it begs the question, what is really going on?
Exactly. And here's the thing. Who can argue with the fact that our government must be held to a high level of transparency? Nobody can argue with that, right?
Nope, but nobody can enforce it but them as of right now.
Right, but again, they're appealing to the public. They're trying to advance, at that point in time, they're trying to advance a controversial effort here, which is to call into question a part of the 9/11 cover-up. This is highly controversial. I want to remind you and the audience, by the way, that in the months right after the 9/11 attacks, George Bush stated that let us not tolerate any outrageous conspiracy theories.
Yep.
You're either with us or you're for the terrorists.
Isn't that something? What a statement. What a statement. I remember that very clearly.
Now, what that effectively did is it sent a message to every member of Congress and the media. Mm-hmm. If you dare to challenge the official account, you will have hell to pay. So they were all, every member of Congress was definitely put on notice.
Yep.
Watch what you say. That was watch what you say. That was a condition of what I would call condition of clampdown of censorship.
Yep.
And that anybody who dared to cross that line where you start to ask hard questions, you are then taking your future in
the enemy.
Yeah, you'll be stamped as the enemy, as anti-American, and all of those things. And by the way, also in that time, in the year after 9/11, when public pressure started to mount for an independent investigation, Dick Cheney told then Speaker of the House Tom Daschle and also Patrick Leahy to make sure that if there is an investigation, to limit what they go after as a matter of because of national security. So there was, again, coming from the White House, there was a lot of pressure to keep everything within a limited scope, to not ask any hard questions that would expose very questionable aspects of the 9/11 attacks. And what I would call this is a state of siege that existed in the days after, in the years after 9/11. And that's why when this started to finally unravel 14 years later, and finally did result in the release of the 28 pages, this was a very, very dramatic event because of the level of controversy of this, of anything related to the 9/11 attacks that called the official story into account. So this was part of the process here going that finally did lead up to the release of the 28 pages. That just pressure finally started to build. Also, there was an article in May 12th of 2016 in The Guardian, which exposed how the 9/11 Commission suppressed the information from the 28 pages, because there were two staffers, two researchers on the 9/11 Commission staff, Dana Leisman and Mike Jacobson, that knew of the 28 pages. They were actually also staffers in the joint inquiry. And I want to read here. Philip Zelikow, who was the executive director and who was a Bush insider, I want to just quote here from the article. It says, Zelikow fired a staffer who had repeatedly protested over limitations on the Saudi investigation after she obtained a copy of the 28 pages outside of official channels. Other staffers described an angry scene late one night near the end of the investigation when two investigators who focused on the Saudi allegations were forced to rush back to the commission's offices after midnight, after learning to their astonishment that some of the most compelling evidence about a Saudi tie to 9/11 was being edited out of the report or was being pushed to tiny, barely readable footnotes and endnotes. The staff protests were mostly overruled. So what wound up in the final 9/11 Commission report regarding the Saudis was basically a statement to the effect that there was no high-level or no evidence of high-level Saudi involvement that could be traced to the 9/11 attacks. But what this was a lie, by the way, because in the 28 pages we have the ambassador from Saudi Arabia, Prince Bandar, who was a close confidant of the Bush family, mentioned throughout the 28 pages, he and his wife funding the San Diego cell. So this was an actual lie and cover-up that was within the 9/11 Commission report. So
now, and so no one on the commission who acted to suppress the 28 pages, nor the I guess the judge or whoever it was that overruled these the couple of people that were trying to bring this information out. None of these people were held accountable for obstruction.
Correct. Never.
Unbelievable.
No. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So then, I have one more interesting detail to add, which is very, very dramatic, Ed. So we're back in 2016 through the first half of the year where the pressure was building from the media, also from within Congress. There were 71 co-sponsors of the H.R. 14 calling for the release of the 28 pages. And that resolution, by the way, was calling for President Obama himself to be the one to release the 28 pages. However, it was learned that through some legal channels and through the participation of former Senator Mike Gravel, who was famous for the release of the Pentagon Papers and reading the Pentagon Papers into the public record back in the 1960s. The Pentagon Papers containing incredible body of evidence showing that the Vietnam War was launched on false pretenses, and showed the criminality behind the launching of the Vietnam War. Well, as it turns out, Senator Gravel was sued for the exposure of what was classified information, considered classified information at the time. However, he challenged it and won at the level of the Supreme Court, which decided that as a member of Congress, he was within his rights, his constitutional rights, specifically the speech and debate clause of the Constitution, which says that a member of Congress who takes action to inform the public and his constituents on matters that affect them directly, when the exposing of this knowledge or information is done on the floor of Congress, he is protected by the speech and debate clause.
Wow.
So he won that. That was a unanimous decision by the Supreme Court. So a lawyer by the name of Mick Harrison, who is now the executive director of the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. People can learn more about this organization at lcfor911.org. That's lcfor911.org. Mick Harrison wrote a brief regarding the fact that the speech and debate clause would also protect any member of Congress if they were to release the 28 pages.
Wow.
Because, as it turns out, the Joint Inquiry Report on 9/11, which contains the 28 pages, was a product of Congress, not a product of the executive branch. Therefore, the executive branch, as it turns out, had no authority to classify the document in the first place.
Wow.
And I might add that since there was really nothing in the 28 pages which threatened national security, that for George Bush to classify that chapter was an abuse of power.
Wow.
So,
which would be treason because he violated his oath of office.
Correct. That was an impeachable offense, I would add, sure.
And wouldn't we still not be outside of the scope of time to bring those charges up? I mean,
that's an interesting question.
Yeah, just because he's not president anymore, that shouldn't matter. There's a statute of limitations. I mean, and we're talking about not your, everyday, the kids stole candy from the store. we're talking about an abuse of power, a hoodwink on the highest level by the highest officer, arguably in the world.
Yeah, very true. This it was an abuse of power, and I think that is a legally actionable criminal act. And this is all very important and needs to be reported on.
Who could file such a case? Could anyone bring about such a case?
If you were anybody who was damaged by the 9/11 attacks, and here's the thing though, many 9/11 family members were given financial compensation by the government.
They probably have to sign something that by giving the money, you got to shut up too.
Right, they agreed not to sue the government or the airlines.
Did any of them not take the money?
One that I know of did not, but she's passed away, Ellen Mariani, which is an interesting story. However, there are other people damaged by the 9/11 attacks. There are survivors. Mm-hmm. There are first responders. There are, I think, business owners as well. These are all people who did not receive official compensation and did not sign away their rights to sue the government. So there are people out there. This is why, by the way, it's so important to learn about the work of the Lawyers Committee, because they have a window of time here now in which they want to take further action. But just to close up on this point of this speech and debate clause.
Yeah.
What was going on then, going back to the summer of 2016, is after Mick Harrison wrote this legal brief, it was submitted to members of Congress, including Walter Jones, Stephen Lynch, and Thomas Massey, who had been spearheading the legislation to release the 28 pages. They then finally realized that it's time to ratchet up the pressure, and they submitted a new resolution called H-Res 779, in which they used this data, or this, I should say, this constitutional argument that Mike Gravel won from, and they said in this resolution, if President Obama fails to expose and reveal the 28 pages, they will then, on their own, through an act of Congress, release the 28 pages. So this ratcheted up the pressure. By the way, by this time, James Clapper, who was head of the DNI, Director of National Intelligence, had already been feeling the pressure, and there had been a process for about 3 months where, he was going through the 28 pages to determine what if there was anything sensitive to national security, et cetera, et cetera. So the process was underway at that time. Because, again, the momentum had been building. And then finally, the goal was reached because on July 15th of 2016, the 28 pages were finally released to the public. And what's interesting is a couple things. It still contained about 100 redactions, number one. And number two, on the same day, people like Nancy Pelosi, within high levels of power in the government, Nancy Pelosi and even Devin Nunes, a Republican who was head of the House Intelligence Committee, came out in support of the release of the 28 pages. So very interesting and very dramatic when you add all of this up.
So even in the 28 pages, there were over 100 redactions. So we're talking about black lines covering stuff.
Yes. However, even with those redactions, I mean, on page 1 and 2, and every page after that, there is absolutely incriminating information that shows funding coming from high levels within the Saudi levels of Saudi officials and entities, and shows cover-up, collusion, shows facilitating of the events, especially with the San Diego cell, and it even shows that there were FBI assets that knew and were watching everything going on. So the 28 pages, even with the 100 redactions, is loaded with actionable evidence, despite the fact that you hear on TV the spokesman from Obama at the time, I think Josh Earnest is his name, and in many articles trying to downplay the significance of the 28 pages, they would make statements such as, yes, there's the 20 pages is out, and as we've been saying for so long, it shows no evidence of Saudi involvement. Completely contrary to the truth that anybody can read. It's just astonishing of how incredibly deceptive our government and media was, even after the 28 pages were released, and just expecting that nobody would read them. Because if you do,
exactly,
it's completely opposite to what we're being told. And by the way, if anybody has not read the 28 pages, I would urge you to do so. You can download a copy at hr14.org. That's hr14.org, and there's a lot of other background there at the website. And I would urge people to join our Facebook group, because there's a continued need for vigilance and organizing.
Yeah, and I could also offer the 28 pages. I guess I'll download them myself also, and offer them on my site. But definitely check out all of the different groups and organizations that our wonderful guest Les has mentioned throughout his talks here, and at the end we'll definitely give you an opportunity to recap on some of those. Yeah, definitely quite a whole happening here, and just to come back to what we're talking about in terms of charging Bush during his from his abuse of power during the administration regarding declassification. I'm curious, is there a definition? What constitutes a person who was affected by 9/11? Because you said that people who were affected, so we've covered the families and we covered other people who were in the buildings and workers and so on. Is there a definition that's out there, and if so, who created a definition of what constitutes a person affected by the events of September 11? Because one could argue that everyone, especially every American, was affected. I mean, it was a major psychological blow that took place. So I'm just really curious if there's any kind of framework on that.
Yeah, interesting question. Because you're right, everybody was affected now, and we continue to be affected every second of every day by the attacks of 9/11. However, from a legal perspective, I think although there may be a type of lawsuit like that is submitted for the public interests, in other words, and what's called public policy, they can be done. They're kind of obscure, though, and difficult in many respects to take on. It's a very specialized type of a lawsuit. So, because of the generalness of it, and it would be interesting to look into, but for practical reasons, because of the sort of obscure nature of that type of lawsuit, it might be difficult from a practical perspective to actually pull off.
Then maybe we could start a class action, with the, whoever would fall under the legal classifications of having been affected, who did not sign their rights away, to bring about suit. Maybe we could kind of put together a collective and get old Junior on the hook.
Well, absolutely, and so that's a very important aspect of where we are now going forward, is because if there are to be another series of lawsuits, let's say, or even a single lawsuit that goes after these issues that we were talking about so far, and other aspects of 9/11, which we haven't even gone into, that are very, very relevant. How would we engage the public? How would we find people to fill the role of plaintiff in the lawsuit? And so these would be people that have what's called standing. And the definition of standing is simply anybody who's been harmed in any way, whether physically, financially, even emotionally. People who can be, a lawyer can argue, has been harmed, their life changed, affected in detrimental ways. So there are a lot of people out there, whether, again, they're survivors, first responders, business owners in the area. These are all people that would fit under the definition of people who were harmed, and therefore it could be argued that there is, quote, jurisdiction. And these are just legal components that need to be in place in order for a lawsuit to get established and move forward. Because the first thing that the defendants would do in a lawsuit is file for motion to dismiss, saying you have no grounds, you have no standing.
Exactly.
So that's the first hurdle you got to get over.
Okay, well, this is definitely something that we should definitely follow up on, and I know of a couple of individuals that would definitely jump on board. I don't know if you're connected to I think his name was Willie Rodriguez, who was the head maintenance guy for the towers at the time of the attack, and he's been very outspoken about what he's seen. I understand that he does a lot of speaking engagements covering what he saw, which contradicts everything in the NIST report. In terms of explosions going off even in the basement prior to the first plane even hitting.
That's right. That's right. So, yes, I agree. Willie Rodriguez, who I've known, since I'd say 2005 or so.
Oh, very cool.
And, he's spoken at some of our events through those years and have, a wonderful relationship with him and great respect for him. And I remember we were at a NIST hearing downtown. It was one of the major NIST hearings. There was about eight major ones, and Willie was there. And
wow, yeah, get into that.
He spoke out. Yeah. What was interesting is the head of the NIST investigation, the engineer by the name of Siam Shundar, made a statement saying, hey, we're very interested in the public's participation, and we are very open to any information from the public about what they saw 9/11, what they know, what they suspect, that could be beneficial to our investigation. Now, that was a very interesting statement because NIST was definitely very much an orchestrated cover-up, okay? And there's been a lot of analysis by experts in their documents, and I myself attended 5 of the 8, I think there were 8 major hearings. And I saw the cover-up going on close up. Matter of fact, there would be in several of these hearings, several of us activists would show up and ask very hard questions. And so we became known to the engineers that were conducting these hearings, and they would be overheard in the hallway saying, yeah, those 9/11 conspiracy theorists are here. Okay?
Unbelievable.
Yeah. Now, there was a hearing, I believe, at one of the hotels, I believe it's a Marriott Hotel downtown, and Willie was there, and Siam Shundar made the statement I just shared, asking for any input from the public because, NIST is an open investigation that that welcomes public input.
Yeah, right.
Willie Rodriguez stood up and pointed and said, wait a minute. I'm William Rodriguez. I was there, and I contacted you a couple of times with direct knowledge and information. I contacted the FBI, and you never responded. You never contacted me back. You never were open to anything I had to say.
Whoa, and what was the response?
Deafening silence.
Oh, I wish I could have been there. Oh, my.
So, yeah. So that's an interesting story about Willie, and I agree that if there were to be legal actions moving forward here, which we hope there will be, I think he would be a great plaintiff for many, many reasons.
Absolutely. Okay, wow. Yeah, this is great stuff. What I wonder was that were those hearings were they recorded? Can anyone get kind of archived videos of them, or are they online somewhere?
That particular hearing, Willie had a camera. So he's got a recording of that.
He has that. He has that on video, and then no response virtually from Sandar.
Right.
Wow.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really I definitely would love to. Do you know if he has that on a website of his or anything?
I do not know, to tell you the truth.
Okay, I would love to post that video. That to me sounds like a really powerful moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
That people should get in touch with. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so now parallel to the release of the 28 pages was the development of, as you mentioned earlier, the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act, known as JASTA. If you could just maybe give a little background and explain why that bill was necessary.
Okay, yeah, very important. The 9/11 families have been engaged in lawsuits, specifically against Saudi Arabia and related entities, going back to, you ready for this, 2002. And this was due to the fact that there's evidence of a money trail. And, one of the standard approaches in trying to prosecute any crime is go after the money, find them. If there's a money trail, you have evidence there, and that can lead to many more aspects of the crime. Well, there was evidence of a money trail, and this is what they went after starting in 2002. However, they found out that there were obstacles to going after Saudi Arabia. One is called sovereign immunity. This is a centuries-old standard in which countries have this agreement where they don't sue each other. They can't sue each other. And this, I guess, it's part of an international law. And however, what the 9/11 families needed to do is find a way to lift that immunity, because they have evidence that a foreign country, foreign government, had taken an action which resulted on death and damage here on U.S. soil. So due to that fact, there should be no protection of sovereign immunity. And so what they found was they needed to do basically to create an exception of the foreign FSIA, Foreign something Immunities Act, Foreign Service Immunities Act, I believe it's called, FSIA. And that's all this legislation was, this attempt that actually had to take place over 7 years.
Wow.
Called the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act, or JASTA for short. And it was refined and over 7 years, and various concerns were addressed, and finally it was passed despite opposition coming from the Obama administration and high-level officials from the U.S. security state. And it's very dramatic. Here's what happened. In May of 2016, there was a voice vote in the Senate where the Senate voted unanimously in favor of passing JASTA, which would, again, enable the 9/11 families to sue Saudi Arabia. That's dramatic, that the Senate would vote in a voice vote unanimously. Then it also passed unanimously in the House September 9th of last year, 2016, just days before the 15th anniversary. Now, the atmosphere then was, the 9/11 families have been working all these years towards justice for the loss of their loved ones. And, the government should do everything within its power to clear the way for them to pursue this justice in court. And by the way, the 9/11 families were so frustrated by this point, and all they wanted was to get back to the lawsuits and get their day in court. They were not even that interested in a new congressional investigation. They didn't really trust the process. What they wanted was just to get back into court because they knew they could prove their case with the release of the 28 pages, as well as a lot of whistleblower testimony, which they had been accumulating over the years. So these were voice votes that passed unanimously in both houses of Congress. But however, Obama had been promising that he would veto JASTA, which he did, to the shock of the 9/11 families, using this rationale that our servicemen and diplomats and companies engaged in military efforts overseas would then become vulnerable to reciprocal lawsuits. So get that what this was doing, it was admitting that the U.S. had committed war crimes in various areas around the planet where we were engaged in military operations, and we didn't want to be held in a position where then foreign nationals could reciprocate and sue us,
Wow.
members of Congress. Yeah.
Wow.
Very, very telling. Now, however, this was completely unfounded because there was already legal standards in foreign countries called status of service agreements. So wherever we have U.S. bases, our military are held to the legal standards of that country.
Right.
Makes sense, right?
Absolutely.
So this is a bogus argument. So
right, we don't want to do it here because it'll get us in trouble everywhere else.
Yes, it was basically an admission that the
Great
U.S.
guilt
has engaged
everywhere. Yeah.
war crimes through torture,
Yep.
drone killings of innocents.
That's right.
You got that?
Yep.
Wow. So I saw this and I thought to myself, well, wait a minute. This is fantastic. This is very positive because what this would do is then put, real sort of limitations up for the U.S. military agenda, and possibly be an actual cause to bring about at least a slowdown, if not ending of military aggression, U.S. military aggression, for fear that they would be held to this higher standard of law, for God's sakes. And this would then be a launch pad for, believe it or not, the breaking out of peace.
Right. That's right.
So I saw this as an incredible, very incredible opportunity for the peace movement to rally around. So here's what happened, though. Again, Obama vetoed the legislation. However, that required then Congress to either accept the veto or call for what's called a roll call vote.
Right.
Not a voice vote, but an actual roll call vote to override this veto, which is what took place, where just the days after, the week after the 15th anniversary of 9/11. In the Senate, they called an actual roll call vote, which voted 97-1 in favor of overriding the veto. And then I believe it was the day after, the House followed suit. No, several hours later in the same day, and they voted 348-77 in favor of overriding the veto.
Wow.
And this gave Obama his first veto override just months before the end of his term. And this was so dramatic. Also, given the fact that Obama had promised 9/11 family members on at least 2 occasions, if not 3 occasions, I forget it, 2 to 3 occasions, he promised them that he would obtain the release of the 28 pages, which he did not do and would not have done were it not for this incredible amounting of public pressure, media exposure, and action, legislative action, and support from the general public calling for the release of the 28 pages and passage of JASTA.
Wow. This is it's been quite a I don't even know what to call it, a journey, a show. I don't even know what to call it at this point, but it's really been a kind of a spectacular spectacle up to this point, with all kinds of ups and downs, twists and turns, and this is but this is where it all can come out. The full cat can come out of the bag.
Yeah, I agree. There's even this one aspect of the 9/11 attacks coming to the public view and being prosecuted can, and I think very strongly, will lead to the unraveling of much more of the 9/11 attacks, including the participation and guilt of U.S. Figures that we spoke about earlier at the highest levels of the Bush White House, highest levels of the military and intelligence apparatus. It could also lead to exposure of the of aspects of the physical evidence, and also exposure to the participation of other foreign entities involved in the 9/11 attacks. There's evidence that has yet to be totally pursued and investigated. The United Arab Emirates, spies within the U.S. coming from Israel that were watching the attacks unfold and had foreknowledge, and other questionable, I'll just say other evidence that warrants further investigation that can be traced to Israel. Also, Pakistan. The Pakistani intelligence service was known to have wired $100,000 to Mohammed Atta, and there are other national entities, whether MI6 is questionable, and even German intelligence sources who were in touch with Mohammed Atta, yet to be fully investigated after all these years.
I think that we may want to approach, or not, I don't know, we, but who, those fighting the battle in the legal forums, may want to, take the approach that is commonly done all the time. And when we're talking about taking down, let's say gang situations or drug cartel situations, or any kind of criminal ring type of situations, they often give levels of immunity to to all of the underlings who were just part of the workings that, and who were, coerced or forced or, however their services were brought into the fold, in order in return for the complying with bringing evidence that really shows the head of the snake and the actual organizers and architects of the whole plan. Because when we talk about the construct of the global community, most countries, and therefore most countries' intelligence agencies and militaries and so on are under the thumbs of the greater cabal, and groups that are really kind of moving the chess pieces around the global board. And I think that's who we really need to go after, or get to, because all these other people and entities, I feel like, the money is nice, they'll do it for some money, but I think more often than not, it's their complicitness in these, in these activities are more out of, that they're being controlled, that they may feel they have no choice, because those who are bringing the plans to the table and saying, look, here's what I want you to do, here's what you better do, there's really not much room for argument. They're essentially, there are offers that people can't refuse.
Yeah, very true. This is a force that rules with absolute power. They are, I would say, trying to close in on the absolute kill, so to speak, in terms of wiping out freedoms and implementing complete, total control through which they have the capability to do. They have the technology to do. And so what's required is we need to educate ourselves and educate as many people as we can and organize. And there's an organization that I'm part of called the 9/11 Truth Action Project. Their website is 911tap.org. This is what we're working on, and we have to become, at this point, a political force, which we can do, and just a matter of finding, even 10, 15, 20 people within a district and then multiplying from there.
Right.
Matter of fact, one friend and myself met with an aide from my congresswoman's office in Brooklyn, Nydia Velázquez, to tell him and inform, Nydia Velázquez's entire office about the 28 pages and that whole effort and the legislation, and had a great meeting with him, by the way, with this aide. And guess what? About maybe 6 weeks later, she co-signed the resolution, which was a major thing, and it just shows that even two people
can make something happen.
Can make something happen, right? And so what we need to do at this point is organize the district level, and the way I see it is what our goal is to create a Congress that is 9/11 aware, deep state informed, and fully cognizant of the fact that there's a large constituency out here that knows that we have been conned. We knows that our government and our institutions have been taken over and hijacked for decades and decades, and knows that we've participated and been led into wars based on false premises, knows that there was a pre-existing agenda behind the 9/11 attacks, and we will not tolerate this. And the way we show that we have clout is we build our numbers and we share these messages with our Congress people and say, look, you need to be also aware of this history of criminality within our country, and the fact that there's all this evidence showing that our country's been hijacked and our Constitution is under threat, and you have taken an oath to protect the Constitution from enemies, foreign and domestic. And we're going to hold you to that oath. And if you intend on keeping your job, you need to take action. Otherwise, you will be out of a job.
And held accountable for not fulfilling your oath, specifically when the problems are domestic.
That's right. So this is where we're at, and it kind of gets to I think where we can wrap up here for this interview, because what I just shared was what the public needs to know and what the public can do at this point in time. And what this will help to do is get to the wider spectrum of 9/11 issues and how it affects so much from our daily lives, whether it's coming from U.S. foreign policy, U.S. domestic policy, financial policy, that affects every one of us on a day-to-day basis. Again, by exposing the deception of 9/11 and pursuing justice for 9/11, by its very nature, will expose the forces, the corporate and military forces that dictate policies, whether it has to do with all the domestic issues, freedom, justice, privacy, economics.
All the things being eroded on a minute-to-minute basis right now.
You got it. Whether it's who controls the environment,
right.
These forces behind corporate domination and energy.
Yep.
So by exposing the powers behind the 9/11 attacks, you will also be, in effect, reining in the forces of this corporate, political, military domination of our domestic life and our international policies. So this is what the world is calling for now. And what this entails, though, Ed, is us becoming what I would call a culture of truth. Because we have the knowledge, we have the research that has gone on for decades, coming from very, very highly accomplished academics and scholars and professionals when it comes to either the history of our false flag operations and the evidence of 9/11 being an act of empire, let's say. We have all that knowledge. We have the knowledge and research of the crimes of state that resulted in high-level assassinations. We have all that. What we need to become is a culture of truth that takes a stand saying we will no longer tolerate these high-level crimes. We demand that our representatives uphold their oath of office, their oath to the Constitution, and we demand that all government and public institutions that form policy also put them on notice to let them know that we are holding them to account for their demanding that they also support having a government that is accountable to its people, that in where no one is held above the law. That's what it is for us to do, to become this type of a culture. And with this, what we can do, and what we will in effect be doing, is restoring our public standing on the global stage, where we show that we as Americans are honorable, we are a people of integrity, and we are then showing that we want to exhibit our global leadership based on principles that will bring about the best possible outcome for the entire planet. That's what it is for us to do.
I'm with you 1,000,000%, and I'm glad you used the word demand. And what, and I'll say this, and then we'll wrap it up. In order to get to that society of truth, that truth society that you spoke of, it requires something that I think is really starting to happen more and more right now, given the milieu of everything in the world, and that's self-awareness is the first step. People have to become more self-aware first, in who they are and how they see themselves and how they want to see the world. And then that will spill over to the next level, which is kind of, so that's the individual. Then that will spill over to the social, societal level of self-awareness and being aware of, what's really happening, and then coming into, recalling our power, because it is directly our lawful right to demand those things. That's written in the foundations of our country, and it's our natural right anyway. And once we know that, we can get back to demanding our rights, rather than this feeling that has set in of there's nothing we can do and powerless and all that kind of nonsense that the system has worked into our minds. It's just been waiting for us to wake up. And
right. I would add that it's our right to demand, demand accountability from our leaders and institutions. Not only is it a right, I would also say, and I'm sure you would agree, it's an obligation.
Absolutely, a necessity.
It's absolutely a necessity, and because the major actions are going on around the planet done in our name, which are highly destructive.
That's right.
And we just cannot allow this to go on, and so we do have an obligation, and we can do this. We can change the world for the better, but we have to understand that we have had treasonous crimes committed against us, and this cannot be tolerated. And this has gone on for many decades, and we have lacked the capability to do anything about it. So the necessity is organize, educate, inform, organize, and we can do that. We I think have a message. We have a very powerful message, and we have the most noble and honorable intent, and it's up to us to kind of, fulfill our role in this most noble mission, and that's what it is, a mission.
That's right, and that's it. So we're gonna put all of our energies and mental, physical, and spiritual, and bring them together and really steer the course of history into a better direction. And so okay, great. And what I'd like to do now, Les, if you wanted to just go over real quick some of the organizations or websites that you'd like people to visit and check out, please give them that information.
Okay, very good. hr14.org. This is the site that I manage about the 28 pages in JASTA. There is ongoing activity and news coming out, and please join our Facebook page. You'll see a link there on the right side. Next, the 9/11 Truth Action Project is an organization dedicated to district by district organizing around the events of 9/11 and informing the public about the alternative research on 9/11. And the website there is 911tap.org. And lastly, the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, which is LCF, as in Frank, OR, 911.org. That's LC4911.org. This is the Lawyers Committee's website, which we very much support because they're on the forefront of pursuing legal actions that are unprecedented in obtaining justice for the 9/11 attacks.
Excellent. Thank you for that, and I'm sure our listeners will be very appreciative and take the time when they have it to check these sites out and just get further informed and maybe see how you can, if you'd like to get involved. At the very least, the spreading of knowledge and information is something every one of us can do now, thanks to social media and the internet. So it's not the machine is not entirely terrible. It has given us tools that we can use to reshape it, to how we collectively see fit. Les Jamieson, well, hey man, thank you so much for your time today and your wisdom and the body of work and that you've put forth in terms of gathering knowledge and pushing for legislations and just really digging into this subject. I personally deeply appreciate it, and I hope a lot of listeners do as well, because this is all necessary, and not enough people are on that yet. And so I thank you very much for everything you've done and for your time today.
Thank you so much, Ed. I'm honored to be on your podcast and part of your effort with the website that you're launching, this organization, and I support it wholeheartedly and look forward to continued collaboration. Thank you, Ed.
Wonderful. Thank you, Les. And the website, ladies and gentlemen, is fate.org. That is spelled PHAET. FATE stands for the People's Honorable Alliance for the Truth, and that is what we're all here to bring forth. I thank you very much. I am the Wordsmith, and this has been the first inaugural podcast for the organization. Thank you for listening. Thank you again, Les, for being our guest, and we look forward to having you on again very soon. A very warm thank you again to Les Jamieson. Les, thank you very much for being on our show. We really enjoyed the information that you brought forth today. Very enlightening stuff. Really great insights. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I am the Wordsmith. That's right, the Wordsmith. Am I real? Am I a phantom? Remains to be seen. Nah, just kidding. Best believe I'm here and I'm real, and I'm here to make something happen. I'm here to help all of you gain some knowledge, gain some insight, myself as well. we're all on this journey together. So if we're not helping each other, what are we doing? Well, this has been the first official podcast of Faith.org, the People's Honorable Alliance for exposing the truth, and I'd like to thank all of you for listening. I appreciate your time, your love, your energy, your wisdom. Thank you for being with me, and I hope to really build this community and really make this a movement with your help. Thanks again. Until the next episode, I'm out.